Comes to customizing your kits, an entire airbrush setup can be quite costly. So, in today's video, I decided to hand paint a kit to show you guys what it would be like and to see what we can learn from our featured builder. Let's get it. So today's guest has made an appearance on my channel before. If you know who it is, then you're a true OG. It's my friend, none other than Liam from Millennial Model Mayhem. Liam, what's going on, dude?
Hello, people. Thanks for having me, Taz. And hello, Plymouth audience. If any of you remember me, then good job, I guess.
For my viewers who actually don't know who you are, who may be new here, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and let them know where they can find you?
Well, I guess I'm one of them content creators right off the bat, doing a mix of minis and Gunpla. Right now, I lean more towards the Gunpla stuff. My background is as a miniature painter, so that really influences my Gunpla customization. So I do a lot of hand painting and edge highlighting and that sort of stuff. My channel is called Millennial Model Mayhem because I don't like to limit myself. I have a hard time picking between minis and Gunpla. So mostly Gunpla, but there's always going to be a little bit of minis there. On YouTube, that's Millennial Model Mayhem. Instagram, it's m.m.mayhem. And then Twitter, m_m_mayhem. There's a really long winded introduction for you.
For those of you guys who can't remember all that, don't worry. I'll go ahead and put everything in the description so you guys can find him right away. Liam has a great background in hand painting, and I feel like he'd be perfect for this video to give us a sort of introduction into the idea of hand painting your kit. So, Liam, when it comes to hand painting, what's the best type of paint to use?
I'd say definitely acrylics. I'd say that's mostly down to the water. They're like water soluble, and they don't have the same harsh chemicals that enamels and lacquers will have, so that'll help your brushes last longer. You won't have to deal with any fumes, and a lot of the time you can mix different brands of acrylics together, especially the ones that are designed for models. You can mix and match brands to mix colors for fun. I have hand painted with lacquers before, not enamels yet, but hand painting with lacquers was a bit of a pain.
Thank you for sharing that insight. I'll go ahead and link that video in the description below too, so you guys can check out how he did with that. Now that we've talked about acrylic paints overall, are there any brands that you recommend picking up for starters? Either ones that are good for starters or one that you'd recommend that are good quality or bang for your buck?
Well, generally, I preface like all my product recommendations with see what your local store has. I find personally Vallejo products are the best balance of like value and paint quality. And I also like the dropper bottles they come in. Like I mentioned before, with one of the advantages of acrylics, you can mix and match brands. So my paint collection personally, like it's probably majority Vallejo. There's also some Games Workshop in there. Games Workshop is good quality paint, but probably like the most overpriced stuff. Also some P3. P3, it's not as like common to find, but I really like the creaminess of the paint, I guess. A lot of the American miniature painters are fans of Pro Acryl, but I haven't been able to get my hands on any of that yet. If you have a local store to go to, or even an art store, a lot of time you can just pick the colors that suit your fancy as you like paint more and try out different paints. You'll find the style that you like to work with the most. If I'm giving a one brand answer, I'd say Vallejo.
I feel like Vallejo will probably be the most readily available elsewhere, but again,
Yeah,
start
yeah.
local, support your local groups, and build a community there. Now that we have an idea for our paints, let's talk about brushes. There are many different sizes, many different styles, and so for someone who's just starting out, what is something that someone should look for in a good brush or set of brushes? And also, again, if there's any recommendations you have for brushes too.
First, if you're just starting off, I'd say you can get like a set of relatively inexpensive synthetic brushes. You want ones with fairly stiff bristles. The useful shape is a round brush. Recommend starting off with, an entry level synthetic set, but at the same time, you can get like a really dirt cheap, like dollar store set because you're going to want to have some brushes that you can just not worry about keeping in good shape. Just having throwaway brushes is just always useful to have. The act of dry brushing is pretty rough on the brush itself and like beats them up pretty fast. So you kind of just want to have throwaway brushes for that. And then if you're ready to like take it to the next step and level up, I'd say if you can find like a proper artist supply store. You want to get a nice like sable round brush. I use a size 2 and a size 1 a lot. When you drop a bit more money on a nice brush, it is worth investing in like a little bit of the brush maintenance stuff. So yeah, I'd say start off with just like basic synthetic sets are fine. You can get a ton of work done with like a synthetic brush. And I'm not saying like you gotta pay to win with the painting or anything. It's not like too much more expensive.
I think it sounds like something that you can start where you're at, see what you can afford, and then as your collection grows, as you become more comfortable, then you can kind of build it out. Maybe replace a couple brushes here or there, and then keep some of the older ones for, like you said, the dry brushing. We talked about paint, we talked about brushes. Is there anything else that you'd recommend for people just getting started?
Not like right when you get started, but one like early accessory you can pick up as a wet palette is really useful, but there's a little asterisk next to that where it depends on what environment you live in. Like where I live, it's really dry, so a wet palette is like borderline essential for painting here, just because otherwise a lot of paint will go to waste drying on the palette, like while I'm actually painting the model. Wet palettes have like a bit of a learning curve to them, but it's a very powerful tool, but it's not necessary. And that's like kind of one of the main appeals with hand painting over airbrushing is the barrier to entry is a lot lower. A cup for your paint water, some paper towel, and a brush and paints. That's all you really need.
Awesome. And so if you guys want some wet palettes, you guys can pick some up. I've also made a video on how you can make your own at home. But as Liam
Yeah.
said, right now, you don't need it. But hey, if you have some money or you have some time to make one, go ahead and pick one up. So between hand brushing and rattle cans, what kind of primer do you recommend for beginners?
Definitely rattle cans, mostly for a convenience thing. Like you can prime by hand painting and a pinch if you need to. Like, sometimes it's minus 30 degrees Celsius outside and you just really need to prime a mini. You can prime it by hand, but it's just so much faster with a rattle can. I don't know if I've ever met or talked to another mini painter that primes by hand. It's mostly like you only do that if you really can't like you can't get to the store to get a can. I've done it, like I've primed by hand once in a pinch just because I wasn't able, like there was just no way I was able to get a rattle can on my hands to prime, and it kind of sucked.
It can work in a pinch, but if you have the option, try to get a rattle can. Got it. On to actual painting. I know this is going to come up a lot, but how do you know if you thinned and loaded your brush, thinned your paints properly and loaded your brush properly?
Yeah, that's one of those questions that doesn't really have a satisfying answer in terms of like thinning your paint. There is no perfect ratio. Like there's not as specific of a ratio as there is with like airbrush thinning, because a lot of the time with thinning paint for hand painting, you're just like dipping a brush into the paint water that's there and just like thinning it and on the spot and eyeballing it, and it changes depending on how much control you need on the paint. Like if I'm painting the base color of something, it's a big fairly flat surface, I probably won't thin it as much. It depends on what you're going for. Smaller details, you need to kind of hit the sweet spot of thinning where it's thin enough that it doesn't like glob onto the small details when you paint it on. But if you thin it too much, then it's too watery and you'll lose control over it. And in terms of loading up your brush properly, I guess how I'll answer that one is in terms of like what size brush you would be using when you're painting. And the easy answer to that is just always use the biggest brush that you think you can get away with using. And that's just so you have to spend less time going back to refill it off the palette. Every time if you're painting the model or the Gunpla or whatever, every time you have to like stop painting to go and refill the brush, that's like time not spent painting the model. So if your brush just holds more paint, then it's just like makes paint like your painting is faster and better. And then as you work your way into those smaller details, you have to switch to smaller brushes. But the general like rule is try and use the brush that's like the biggest you can get away with. And that's purely just so you can like paint more efficiently.
So when it comes to painting, when would be a better time to use a round brush versus a flat brush?
Well, me personally, I just use flat brushes for dry brushing only. And I kind of use the round brush all the time. It's just like a variation in size of round brush. And that's so I don't have to interrupt my flow of painting by switching to a different brush. You can certainly use a flat brush. And I feel like there's a lot more variety in flat brush sizes. Like that could mean something like really wide or something just like a bit more of a chisel shape compared to a round brush. Any artists watching, if I'm getting like a technical paintbrush name wrong or something, I apologize. I said earlier, but for model painting, I tend to lean towards stiffer bristles most of the time, and that's a control thing. But Flat brushes will also vary in the stiffness of their bristles. Does have an impact on the painting experience.
So now that we've primed our pieces, we're staring at this big gray mass in front of us. What are some basic processes for painting from when the primer's down to maybe some last steps or top coat?
I'd say first of all, it really depends on what you're painting, and I generally think of the painting process. It's pretty simple. You just do the messy parts first, and also like the parts that are like inside the crevices and like inner details first, and work your way out. And also relating it to airbrushing, I know the general practice is you do light colors first and then dark colors, just because that makes like cleaning out the airbrush in between switching colors easier. But I find it makes more sense to do the opposite with hand painting. You want to do your dark colors first, then your light colors. So if you had like a white panel next to a black panel, and if you painted the white panel first, and that goes fine, and then you move on to the black panel next to it, and you accidentally get a bit of black paint on the white section, to correct that mistake, you're gonna have to do multiple layers of white paint on top of that black. But if you paint the black first and then you switch to the white and you make a mistake with the white instead, it's a lot easier to cover up that white with black. Does that make sense?
Right. So start with the dark colors. If you move on to the light colors and you accidentally go out of the lines, you can easily cover up that lighter color with a darker color. Make sense there?
Yeah, just because like it's easy, like the dark colors have better coverage, right?
Got it.
That's pretty much all I had down for notes in regards to the painting process. This whole time I'm only describing my like specific painting process and how I've experienced it. I'm sure some people would disagree on some points.
But I bring you on for your personal experience because everyone's going to pick up a little bit of different things. And so, one of the things that I like about this series is that I can bring in your experience, talk about it, but I can also share coming from my experience and some of the things that I learned. And then the viewers can take what they've learned and just kind of apply it to what they've got. To sum up your points, start with the recesses, start on the insides, whatever you can try to get out of the way first. Start with the dark colors so that you can, when you move on to light colors, if you paint out of the lines, you can cover that up. And then finally make sure you go throughout your details and get those things cleaned up perfectly and then move on to top coat, right?
Yeah, and I would say the stage of like painting the inner details and working your way out, that would take precedence over the dark to light colors. Like think about that step before you think about the dark to light step.
Awesome. Good to know. All right. As you guys know from my future build series, I try to attempt some of the things that are suggested by our guest. And so, in an effort to improve my own hand painting skills, I decided I'd be painting Choo Choo's Demi Trainer here. However, just like last collaboration that I had with Liam, I'm going to ask him to give me a color suggestion for this kit. And then I'm going to go ahead and try it out so that Liam can give me some feedback as far as how I do. So, Liam, what colors do you have in mind for my Choo Choo Demi Trainer?
Well, because I recently finished a project that was a kit bash involving a Witch from Mercury kit, which you should be able to see by the time this video comes out on TaDa's channel. I thought I'd recommend to you similar colors to what I used on that, which I think is a fun combo to work with, which is red, blue, and purple.
Awesome. I'll try to figure out how I can incorporate that into a kit. All right. I have my task. I have my colors. I'll reconvene with Liam once I'm done painting the kit so he can give me feedback and discuss what I did well or what I can do to improve so you guys can learn from my mistakes as well. Liam, thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to catching up with you soon. So let's start painting this kit. As recommended by Liam, I went ahead and primed this kit using a rattle can. If you haven't seen that video and you want to check that out, I'll go ahead and link it up in the corner so you guys can give that a watch as well. With the kit primed, let's get down to painting. Following Liam's recommendations, I started with the most recessed areas, which I like to refer to as the frame bits. These areas got a nice shade of purple, but technically the name of this color is Oxford Blue. Hopefully Liam can forgive me for that. Now, coming from an airbrush background, the first thing I noticed when painting with a brush is that it felt more artistic than with an airbrush. Although I was still just blocking in a lot of the colors, I definitely felt more attached to the piece when compared to painting with the airbrush. Even though it took me much longer because I needed to go through more coats, the entire process felt more engaging and made for an absolutely enjoyable experience. Once the purples were done, it was on to the reds and the blues. Feeling more confident now, I definitely started to pick up a bit of speed, but I still tried to keep my layers thin in order to minimize brush strokes as much as possible. With the kit all painted up, I went ahead and gave it a gloss top coat before panel lining and ultimately finishing with a matte top coat. And before I show it to you guys, let's go ahead and check back in with Liam and see what he has to say about the kit as well. All right, so we're back with Liam today. Liam has not seen the pictures so far. He hasn't seen anything of the Choo Demi trainer that I've been working on. And so his reaction is going to be completely genuine. He hasn't seen anything yet. So, Liam, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Hello, plasmotherapist, aka Taz. Thanks for having me back.
Great to have you
Yeah,
again. I know we haven't been able to meet for a couple of months because our schedules haven't lined up, but it's good to have you back. Let's get right into Choo Demi trainer. So, here is the picture. Ta-da! So my thinking behind this was I wanted to kind of go for a clean build for somebody who may be coming into painting their Gundams and wanting to just start off with a simple clean build. And so this is kind of what I came up with, a little bit of a cartoonish style, drawing a little bit of the Millennial Model Mayhem, inspiration here, going for a little bit more of a stylistic choice. And so had fun with a lot of the colors. I was really happy with it. And so it's up to you if you want to ding me for this, but the purple color here is actually Oxford blue. It's up to you if you want to say I didn't use purple at all, but I thought it was really funny how I was like, "Oh, this is a beautiful color. What is it? Oxford blue." So,
no, I'd still check off the purple box for that one. You're good. Well, yeah, I'll definitely need to zoom in a second, but I guess the first thing, just the way you've blocked out the color, and this is like a very subjective critique.
mhm.
You kind of have like maybe an even amount of purple or the Oxford blue and the blue and the red. It's like roughly a like 1 to 1 to 1 mix of the 3 of them, and I tend to like I mean, when I'm painting mine, a lot of the time, I tend to have, like, one color be the main focus. When I look at the legs, it looks like, okay, red's the main color, blue and purple are the accent, and then going up to the torso, it looks a bit more like blue is the main color and red is the accent. That was just, like, one thing I noticed off the bat.
So my idea behind it was I went with sort of a blue is going to be more of the outer armor, red is going to be the inner armor, and the purple is going to act more like the frame bits. So if you look kind of around the knee here, you can see that the
Yeah.
purple's the frame bits, red's the inside, blue's the outside. And then for here, I went with a blue on the outside, but I felt like a blue shield would have been too much blue, which is why I went with the red. So overall, just again, having a lot of fun with the colors and really enjoyed it. Now that we've got some of the colors out of the way here, let's get into my first question. So as you can see, I'll zoom in here. I have a little bit of some chipping going on in here and even some down here
Oh,
as I
yeah.
was working with the kit and putting it back together. So when it comes to painting your kits up, how do you balance between taking your kit apart to be able to paint it completely versus leaving it together to minimize the amount of chipping that may happen while you're painting?
Yeah, definitely chipping is I mean, even with when you're painting with enamels and lacquers is an issue. So when you're painting with acrylics, it's even more of an issue. Usually lean more towards the side of disassemble like the least amount of things possible. A lot of the time I'm just like if the arms and legs are on like a ball joint or something like that, that's easy to take on and off. If you could take off like one side waist piece, then it's pretty easy to take the leg off without chipping the paint. With the shoulders, it kind of depends on the kit, but a lot of times it's just like the legs and arms are separate and like I prime it all in one as one like big bit, and then like the torso and waist is usually like all primed together as one bit. The head's usually pretty easy to paint separately and keep that articulated. With every project I do, I'm always trying to experiment a bit and see like how posable I can make it. So I guess to answer your question, I approach it like I don't disassemble that much. I mostly leave it assembled, and it's usually just like the arms and legs and head that come off. A lot of the time the knees or elbows will have like sliding pieces in them where you can just look at them right away and tell like, okay, well, even if I paint that disassembled with acrylics and reassemble it, like as soon as I move that joint once, it's just going to tear up a bunch of paint. True story.
Awesome. Well,
Multiple projects that's happened.
on to the next picture here. So this is a little bit of a closer up of the chest. What are some things that you notice here in this picture as well? Maybe some things you can talk about. Again, any mistake I make is a learning point, so feel free to nitpick as much as you want.
Yeah, I mean, now that I can see the bicep color balance issue I brought up at the beginning is like, or like your vision for the blocking out the colors makes a bit more sense now.
Hmm.
And I mean, it looks pretty good and nice and clean and smooth. If I was just taking a casual glance at this with no context, like I wouldn't initially guess that it was hand painted. It looks like fairly smooth application. I'm also wondering how you did the panel lining.
So that's actually one of the questions I had for you. I went with more the traditional Gunpla style where I painted the kit and then I top coated it and then went back in with the panel lines. And so
Yeah.
I'll jump ahead down here to the feet section. So as you can see, there's a little bit of I did a little bit of panel lining here. You can see them more on the toes, but around here when I tried to get some of the sections of the feet, I went in with the Tamiya panel liner, and then I just kind of did use traditional way, use the Q-tip to kind of rub it off. And as
Mm.
I noticed, as around certain corners, especially really prominent corners like this, I realized I was kind of rubbing off a lot of the paint. So as someone who's more experienced with hand painting and getting some of these details out, do you have any recommendations for how you can get the panel line look or achieve some panel lining designs without risking the possibility of rubbing some of that paint off?
Yeah, for sure. I usually opt for like the slower the slower way where you paint the color in the panel line is like the base color that's laid down as the foundation, and then I'm like painting around that. Say that's mostly because that issue you brought up of like the cleaning up the panel liner, there is like a bit more risk rubbing the paint off even if there is a top coat. And I usually don't do any top coat until the project is like completely finished at the end anyways.
I was fortunate enough that I was able to get a lacquer gloss coat on top of it to protect it, but I think overall the strength of the acrylic just isn't super meant for rubbing off with a Q-tip. So I think thinking back on it now, do you think an acrylic wash would be something that could also work as well? And what are some pros and cons to acrylic washes?
Yeah, an acrylic wash can definitely work. If you're painting like the miniature painting style, when you're the kind of like basic painting technique is just like base coat and then cover the whole thing in a wash. And that's just like a really easy shading technique that and like people joke about it being called like cheat sauce and stuff like that. If you are going to use the wash, I'd say like if I like wanted a darker panel line, it'll be like apply the base coat, then wash, and then I do the rest of the detail work on top of that. Because if I do the wash at the end, then it's gonna like stain all the work I've done on top of it.
If I'm going to sum it up correctly, and you can feel free to correct me, the idea is with an acrylic wash, you can use it, but be wary that it may alter the final color of your paints a little bit. So if you want to overcome that or still use it, you can go back over it with some of your paint, but then you just got to make sure that you avoid your panel as much as possible to get that acrylic paint on the panel and not on the recess. Make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that's you pretty much said it there. Don't do it like towards the end of the process. Do it pretty early.
I want to jump onto the last section here because this was the one that was the part that I was most worried about because it's got the most surface area here.
Mm.
But picture of the shield, how did I do as far as getting some even paint on a large surface area?
And that
Good.
looks pretty smooth. I mean, I see like it's either like a fleck of paint or a piece of dust that got painted into it down there,
Yeah.
which that's a totally common thing to have happen. But other than that area, it honestly looks like very smooth. So I'd say good job. And I'm also wondering how many layers it was and how much you thinned the paint down.
There was a point where as I was thinning the paint down, I would start to paint it on. And then as I was painting, there would be a streak of beautiful color. And then after that, it just turns to water. And then I had to kind of mess it around to get as much coverage out of that and then go back over it. So if I were to count layers, I would
Okay.
say teens, maybe 20 even around there.
Yeah, well, my initial thought to that is that you probably thinned the paint a little too much. I think I said this like last time. It's kind of like balance you have to find between like, yeah, you can get a smooth result with a lot of coats and thinner paint, but that's like really tedious and takes a while. And in my case, I'm almost always my builds are clean, but I'm not going for like solid flat colors. I'm doing some sort of like gradient or pattern on top of it. Usually for me, like 2 or 3 coats, depending on the colors. If I was trying to replicate the result you were going for with like the clean solid, yeah, I would definitely like thin it a bit more than I usually would. But when I hear you say you did 10 layers or so, that's definitely like I would not want to be doing that many layers. But like I understand why you would have done that many layers.
The first time I sat down to get started painting, I loaded up my palette with all the colors. I sat
Mm,
down. And for the next couple hours, all I did was paint purple. So when it comes to painting, how do you determine how much paint you're going to put on your palette for one sit down
right,
session,
right.
given that sometimes it takes a little bit longer to go back through the colors because you're hand painting?
Yeah, with well, if you're using a dry palette, I'm usually only putting like a little bit of paint down or at a time, refilling the palette pretty frequently. And that's just because I don't want to waste paint. Because, on a dry palette, the paint dries up faster. When I'm on the wet palette, it can load it up with a bit more paint. But at the same time, like I usually don't do the like lay up all the colors down at the start. I find that doesn't work as well when I'm painting Gunpla, mostly because like the Gunpla is a larger model and uses a lot more paint a
Mhm.
lot of the time. And there is a lot of what you said where you're just painting like the session can a lot of the times just be you're painting only one color that whole session. I guess I lean a more conservative when it comes to like putting paint on the palette.
When it comes to painting, you can always add more paint. You can't always put it back in the paint jar when you're done. So I think the best thing to do is start with the color. And if if you're going to move on to another one, you can always add that to the palette later. And then when you're done, you can always just close it up and save it for later. Let's go ahead and wrap up. Liam, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it. Again, Liam, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you guys for watching this video. Turn it over to Liam so he can plug his channel and everything one last time. So Liam, take it away.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was interesting both this session and the one before, hearing your interest about the hand painting and all that. My channel is called Millennial Model Mayhem, and I'm mostly known for hand painting gunpla kits like miniatures because my background is in miniature painting. And but the videos themselves on the channel are a mixture of miniature painting and gunpla painting, and a little bit of tabletop gaming sprinkled in there. So yeah, I appreciate the good old likes and subscribes and all that. And yeah, follow me on the socials.
So there you guys have it for our featured builder series today. Let me know what you guys thought of my kit in the comments below, as well as anything you may have learned from Liam, our featured builder for today. With that said, guys, thanks for joining me today. I hope you found some value in this video, and remember, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll see you in the next one.